Okay, so a couple other housekeeping things. Our next Lunch and Learn session is Wednesday, April 12th. Next month's session will be a little bit different than the past few we've had. It's more of an interactive session. It's with Heather White, and she'll be talking to us about Canva Pro for nonprofits. So I know we use Canva. It's a great tool to use. So please come to that if you're interested in learning more. One more housekeeping item as an added benefit of being an AFP member. New this year, we are recording our Lunch and Learn sessions, and we'll be posting them on our website so you can access them on demand. If you're not a member of AFP, I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about the benefits of becoming a member. So with that said, without further ado, I am pleased to welcome Ron Waston to talk to us about purpose-driven board leadership. Ron, I'll share the screen so we can see your slides. All right. All you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. When Michelle and Jenny put out a little SOS on Monday, we were sitting in the office and said, well, this would be a good opportunity to try this topic. So for those who don't know me, Ron Watson, the better half, the lesser half. I just finished teaching 30 years in higher ed in leadership areas and communication in general. And both Lynn and I are board source certified in nonprofit board development and consulting. And board source, if you're not familiar with the organization, is one of the leading organizations in the country examining how nonprofit boards work. They do a bunch of training, there's a bunch of resources, and I'll send out some links at the end for people who want more information, but they're really at the cutting edge of getting data about board composition, how well they're working, how well they're not working, so on and so forth. So really a leader in the conversation about how effective nonprofit boards are. And what they're suggesting is that we reconceptualize how we think of what a board ought to be focused on primarily. And so I'm going to run through their thinking, and I'm leaving plenty of time for dialogue and questions, because this is a kind of a newer idea. There's a book coming out. There's an article we'll send out that was published, the Stanford Social and Innovation Review, that tries to get us to have this dialogue. And it's really important in the wake of nonprofits attempting to make changes in society, which is what they're all about. Right? They're not about employment. They're not about making money. It's about trying to do social good. And the question is, are we really prepared well enough to do social good? So that's where they're coming from. And the concept of purpose is one of my favorite concepts. It really is. Because when we have common purpose, we can get a lot of things done. When we don't share purpose, we're at odds. Why do we do what we do? We don't do what we do just for the sake of doing it. We do it for a purpose. We do it because we want to make a difference. We want to improve the job rate. We want to improve the conditions for people in poverty, lift them up, so on and so forth, right? That's why we exist. And it's tough. It's tough to get people to ask them, what's your why? Why do you do what you do? Oh, because our programs do X, X, and X. Well, that's congratulations. But why do you do them? And they stumble. We really do stumble. It's amazing. So I always want to return to that. Why do you exist? And one of my favorite authors is Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've ever read Starts With Why or other books he's written. But he always comes back to this notion, because that's what motivates people to action. That's what makes society better. And so let me walk through some of this. And please ask questions as you go along. I would really welcome that. So give subtitles a try. Let's skip that. That's just not here. Hopefully this is it. Yay. Okay. So what they argue is that nonprofit organizations exist to advance social progress, right? But we need to rethink the mindset of a board to be able to do that more effectively. Why? Out with the old. Current structure of a board, right? You have board members, you select board members, you get them with an expertise in marketing, fundraising, HR, accounting. So the organization runs well, right? That's how we comprise most boards, right? Even board matrices, in the old board matrix and everything I say as I go over this requires us to rethink and redo all those forms, right? All those check boxes. Board members are not always connected with the purpose of the organization. Let's say you're a board that serves low-income people in part of the Quad Cities. How many people on your board are connected with that issue? Right? Did we even ask if people were connected with the issue when we invited them to be on the board? Now, one of the digs goes right at what you all do, right? What is the number one function that most people think a board does? I gave it away in the title. Fundraising. Right? So if you think your board is there to fundraise, who are you selecting to be on the board? People of means, either connections or they have personal money. Right? But the data suggests, Linda, you correct me if I'm wrong. You cannot fund a nonprofit through just board donations. Not enough money in the room. Never is. Right? So it's even a false hypothesis, right? That I need that to exist. So we got to change the way. Their argument is how a board functions and thinks. And their argument is it needs to think with purpose. And you have a handout, so you kind of loosely follow along their thinking. So in the previous, we're always thinking about organizational vitality. What makes this organization effective? That's the number one outcome of people when they're on a board, right? This will make us more effective as delivering this program. Right? That's you think that's your duty to the organization as a board. So we're going to rethink that now. I got to get rid of this little box.
I can work on that.
Oh, that's all right. You know, it's not up here, it's just not here. It's really strange. So they argue that there are 4 principles of purpose-driven boards. The first, they put the purpose of the organization, why they exist, over the organization. They think about that first. So if there's an organizational problem, programs are not effective, so on and so forth. Oh, yes, need to give more money to the program. No. It's how about the why? What is the effect? How are we making a difference in increasing or decreasing things we want to see in the community? Purpose before the organization. And at times you might need to sacrifice some things in the organization to make sure the overall purpose is being achieved. One example, we'll get into one example in a little bit. What? No, backwards. Nope. Second is respect of ecosystem. A nonprofit does not exist in a vacuum. All of them are part of an interconnected web of people in a community. Other like-minded nonprofits, private and partnerships, municipalities, who are aiming to do similar things. You don't exist alone. But in the old mindset, you act as if you do, because you're only thinking about the organization's stewardship, right? You see the big change? It's not just semantics, but okay. Third, an equity mindset. In all this, coming out of the wake of the inequities that we keep seeing in society, right? Is this fair? Authorized voice and power. This is one of my favorites. Is that, do you have people of your affected body, right? The group you're trying to help, authorized to talk with you? Not to you, but with you. Is their voice represented on the board? So their notion of what we need to rethink, right, is that these need to be our operating kind of prima facie things we do. This doesn't mean we ignore the budget, right? It doesn't mean we ignore human resources, the governance. We're not saying we ignore any of this. The board still has responsibility for this. Secondary. Purpose before organization. So we'll go through these in a little more detail. So as we stated, so instead of asking, is this good for the organization? We ask, is this good for the social outcome we desire? What are some examples we can think of? So let's say that a nonprofit wants to move. You know, like a new facility, and they find a facility they really like. Good price, maybe they know somebody, maybe a little cheaper rent, a cheaper cost, closer to employees. Great. Let's do it. What if they're also in the service area of another nonprofit? A purpose-minded board asks that question. Does moving our location or opening up a new location infringe on another nonprofit's existing sphere of influence? And is that a good or bad thing? Maybe instead of opening up a new location, we partner with another nonprofit. We do purpose before organization. When you're only thinking about your duty to the organization, their argument is that overall question doesn't come into play. It doesn't even get asked. We're not thinking externally, we're thinking internally. So their whole notion is that our boards need to begin thinking more external to the issue of why nonprofit exists to begin with. How does this affect job placement? How does this affect feeding people? How does this affect X, Y, and Z? Right? That's why you exist. Okay? We never exist just to create a program. Programs are extensions of why we exist. Why before the organization? Thinking about the issue. Respect for the ecosystem acknowledges that the organization's actions may positively and negatively impact the surrounding ecosystem and is committed to be a respectful, responsible ecosystem player. And we all know nonprofits who infringe on this all the time. Keep those stories to yourself. You're being recorded. But you could probably think of examples, right, where somebody doesn't play nice in the sandbox. Right? Or they're withholding information that would be good for all. Right? You know, they think of everything as a zero-sum game. Equity mindset, commitment to advancing equitable outcomes, and interrogating in important ways in which the organization's strategy and work may reinforce systemic inequities. There are organizations seeking to lift people out of poverty who pay people a wage in the organization that's full of poverty. Right? For a variety of reasons. I mean, we're not trying to get into that, right? But then the board should go, wait a minute. What are we doing? Now, if I'm looking at the organization only, all I'm thinking about is the balance sheet. Right? If we pay people more money, you know, I've seen people in Illinois versus Iowa really get concerned about the differences in the prevailing wage. It's 12 something in Illinois, it's still $7.75. It costs more money to do business in Illinois. And that still may not be enough for a family of four, right? The board says, well, how do we maximize resources? Instead of, the larger question is, how are we impacted? What does this say about our commitment? Fighting poverty, if we can't keep on with our own people. Don't ask that question unless you're purpose-driven board. Doesn't come on the table. Somebody might bring it up. But most of the times, that voice isn't even in the room, is what their argument is. It's not even there. It's not in there, and I'll go over some stats for that. The authorized voice and power, we recognize that organizational power and the voice must be authorized by those impacted by your work. Authorized by the people impacted by your work. They're in the dialogue. They're in the room when decisions are made. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. That's what I'm getting. And you got this in front of you. Any questions so far? We put this together.
I think that question, so. I think about our staff and board, and most of the staff are completely, like, there's no integration between the staff and board. So when you're thinking about, we have people on staff who are thinking that big picture strategy. How do you blend that? Because I see a risk in the board getting kind of into the staff's business, and now you have several bosses and the fear of that happening. So how do you do this and avoid that?
This actually flips that entirely.
Okay.
Because the board becomes primarily strategic in their function. Right? They might tell the executive director, you know, they're looking at things that our employees living in. No, well, we need to work on that. But they're not going to get into the internal dynamics of that. Instead, they're actually more externally focused because they're thinking strategically first all the time.
So then you would say like you'd have to have a really strong strategic plan so everyone's working from the same document for that to be successful.
Yeah, this feeds strategic plans, right? This feeds strategic plans that seek to create differences. Not dealing with your administrative issues, those are always important to deal with, your technical issues, right? Your HR plans, your benefit plans, whatever it might be, program effectiveness. Okay, so one example is, you know, you've got a program comes in, you know, we're 89% of our program is achieving its outcome. It's a pretty good number, isn't it? What if the data indicated that of that 89%, there was over 99% effective with white people and 17% effective with blacks and minorities? As an overall effective rate in terms of the program, pretty good. In a purpose mindset, we've got a problem. We have a problem that exists. But that's that equity mindset. That's bringing voices to the top that aren't otherwise there. So then the board starts asking questions. Why are we not achieving a more effective rate with this targeted group, the group we care about, a group, right? Why not? The fact that to me doesn't get into the business of the organization. That's asking a strategic question of, are we achieving our purpose? And then we should ask a subsequent question, if we're not achieving our purpose, can we? Or should we collaborate with somebody else to impact that social problem? And you know from your work that that second question, can we partner with somebody else, another nonprofit, is a question that's not often asked. Because the board's thinking, the board believes their duty is to their organization alone. We reverse it, we're saying that their duty of the board is to the social why. It's to the problem first. Organization second. It reverses that. Right? So the argument here is that it makes boards more strategic, less micromanaging the daily affairs of the organization, more externally focused, more reflective of competition in good and bad ways, recognize I don't want to encroach on somebody else. We can share dollars, things of that nature. So actually, their argument is it reverses that. It reverses that. So, any other questions? Yeah, please.
If you have a very traditional board as is, how do you start this process of making them a purpose-driven board?
Okay, so one of the first ways people do that is they have mission moments, right? Their argument is that's not enough. That might be the first step. Ultimately, you got to change your board composition. So anybody want to take a stab at what the current board composition is? And I'll share the link to the data that Board Sources collected. What percentage of board members are white? What percentage of board members do you think are white? Yeah. 78%. 19% of boards are all white. Well, that's fine if you're trying to solve the white man's problem, right? But it's not fine. That board's got those boards aren't going to be connected to the social problem. And it's not just you care about, right? It's not, that's saying, oh, I'm really concerned about poverty, I'm really concerned about access to whatever. That it's not just having a concern for it. It's being connected to it. So if you had somebody join a board and said, what's your prior experience dealing with, people in hunger and poverty? I'm a really good marketer. See, that would raise a red flag in their system, this new way of thinking, like, hey, you're not connected to the issue. Okay, please.
On that board composition, do you look at the the ultimate composition should be what represents the community as a whole, or as the group that you serve?
Group you serve. So I'm working with a nonprofit and creating a board. Right, no, 3, 2, right, making a real, a good functioning board. We're asking the question. It's a board specifically wants to target Black and minority communities. Are we going to have people with backgrounds in finance and marketing? Sure. Legal, absolutely. But we're also making sure that every person on that board is connected to the issue. They have some experience with the needs of that population. And also they can contribute to the voice of the organization. All right, so we're really trying to put this into action. Now, guess what? A lot of the people we're looking at don't have a lot of board service. It's okay. But a lot of times when people are putting boards together, what do they look for? People have been in other boards, right? We keep recreating the same people over and over and over. We got to break the cycle. So I'm thinking like we only have hey, no bad habits are going to come into the meetings. We don't have to break the board of micromanaging the executive director, right? Because they don't know. We can create them from the ground up. You're creating an organization that's purpose-centered, that really gets at trying to change that aspect of our community. And we already know we got issues like we were just working on yesterday. We got issues on location. Location is a problem for this organization. They're not in the right community yet. Because it wasn't free rent there, right? With all good reasons. But we know in the conversations, we've got to figure out a way to be more in that community. Why? Connected to the community. How can you say you're connected to the community if you have offices that are not necessarily in or even near the community that you hope to serve? Different, right? So the board composition, how about we need to change over time? We start asking different questions. We need to begin programs to give people voices on board that otherwise are not heard. We need to reach out and see them and create opportunities. They don't have to be doctors and PhDs or people with money. Because we're going to get out of, again, I know it's not bad fundraising, but we're trying to get out of the board by source of money. The board is my source of strategy. The board is my source in helping the executive director or the founder achieve the social good they want to achieve, first and foremost. That's a different way of thinking. That changes the conversation that exists on the board. Right? So we know that our boards now are very rich. Right? And that's gone up. I mean, the representation of minorities have gone up. A little bit. But as you said, compared to the communities that they might be trying to serve, Right? You know, and not just race, but other demographic factors, like economic stuff. 49% of people surveyed believe that their nonprofit is disconnected from the community they serve. Half are disconnected from the community they serve. This is the data from which a lot of this goes out. Think about it. That's self-reports. When you average them together, executive directors is one little deal, I'm kind of executive directors will believe more than board chairs that they're disconnected. Okay, the number changed by about 5-6 percentage points. Again, I'll send out I believe in everything to send out, the study themselves. The executive director is more closely connected with the why, right? More connected with the reason they exist than the board. Okay? I thought that was a staggering number. What else we got? Most boards are ill-informed about the ecosystem in which they operate. You know, and 25% say that that is right now a factor they look at in selecting people to be on the board. Right. So you see our trends are not this. Right? We have disconnected boards from the communities they're trying to serve. And there's crunch fund stats too, but I'm not going to give those away now. So I want to leave a lot of time for questions. That's, let's see, do I have one more? 70% of people surveyed say that their boards are preoccupied with fundraising. It is the number one, and it was by a significant number of what their board is designed to do. Designed to raise. And this is all self-report data from nonprofits. Not much conjecture here. We're going to set up there. So I want to leave this really open-ended because, again, this is within the last 3 years, new, right? The folks at Board Source, working with the groups, just have come to their conclusion that our current trajectory is not enough to really solve the social problems and inequities that exist. That unless we change how boards fundamentally operate, we're not going to really make a difference in what's happening. And this could explain the rise in small, boutique, or just beginning nonprofits, right? People who feel left out, disaffected by things. It could explain the lack of integration of working together. It could explain the unwillingness of some to get into where the resources are in the community for their programs that they want to make a difference with. So I mean, it becomes a way to really try to explain a little bit of why we still see significant social inequalities with all the good work that all the nonprofits do. Right? It helps us reimagine, realign, rethink. So again, it's fairly new. It was only like a 1.5-day plan presentation, just kind of to fill in. But I thought it'd be something fun for me to try out. I talked about this in some workshops we've done, but never really talked with a big large group of experienced folks like you. So we wanted to try it. Because I do think it's a worthwhile conversation that we need to have when thinking about the boards. I know the title for this was board engagement of the previous speaker. This engages boards. Right? Think about it. Engage the people with the why. That goes back to what I decided to say about the favorite office, right? These are people connect on a why level, an emotional level. They connect with your cause, your purpose. They're not connected with the reading program itself, they're connected with what the reading program does, how it makes a difference. then you've got them engaged. Now, in all the conversations we can to make sure that we are lowering the poverty rate, dealing with domestic abuse, etc., right? That's first and foremost. I'd love to be part of those conversations. I want alcohol before I go through water. Right? That doesn't engage me. Right? The counts come in all buttoned up and they go through. That's not engaging, it's necessary. Is that an engaging conversation? I can't imagine that, really. It's never been for the ones I've seen. Is it engaging conversations to go through how money is spent, or, no, that's not subcommittee work, that's not board level work. Let's talk about how we can make a better difference in a why, what we're trying to do. That's the first thing we should talk about. Okay, so anyway, what do you hear from you?
So I have a board president who was initiated conversations like this, and I wish you could be here. This would be a great conversation.
It's
So
taped.
yes, I'll have to share it with her. So I am that board of mine is an all white board, and so we've had a little bit of conversation around that. So my question is, as you're working with organizations, my bylaws are very specific because I'm an affiliate of a larger company. So are you finding that you're having to write some of this into bylaws just to make sure that they're sticking
They
to
talk about that, yeah,
that commitment?
right. They talk about, the nice thing is for most nonprofits, you can change your bylaws. There's some that are affected by state laws and things of that nature that they cannot. But the good and the bad, some nonprofit board can do whatever they want. I mean, they're really only responsible to that organization. There's no external entity overlooking them, right? They might be influenced by a foundation or something of that nature, but might have some economic power. Yeah, but for the most part, yeah, you can tweak your bylaws, do that too. But again, if you exist within a larger entity, you have to be a delicate balance, right? But yeah, it would change maybe the bylaws, construction of your meetings, so on and so forth. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they get into that a little bit. Yeah.
You talked about, it is so true that we get board members from other boards. Have you seen techniques or methods that, I mean, what other ways can you try to identify someone being a good board member without looking at other boards?
Well, that begs the question, right? Good board member, what's that mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
See, our traditional notion of good board member is somebody who's had experience with HR, experience with the county, they can help us look at our budget, and blah, 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 right? They're technical. Right, so throw out good, meaning a technical board member, can we put that down, right? Now let's look at a board member as being someone engaged on, from the community and engaged in our life, in our purpose. I would be concerned if a nonprofit could not identify those people. Right? It doesn't matter if they have a fancy degree or whatever, right? You want their voice. You want their representation. You want those going, have you no clue? That's not what our daily life is like. We can't do that here. Instead of, we all have our friends who believe they know the minority experience who are like, we all know people like that. Really? No. I've never been pulled over for driving while white. Ever. I've only got one ticket in my life anyways, but that's aside. But when I was teaching, I know colleagues, license, yeah, they're ready for me to have to go. Why? How do you deal with this? I can hear the story. I can feel compassion to the story, but I didn't live that story. I didn't live that experience. And I can't pretend to know what that's like. So you have to get people who are affected, who have the experience to be part of your board conversation. To be part of it's going to make the dialogue about what we ought to be doing much different. Right? And much more regulated, and especially now. Especially when they go into sections about DEI and things of that nature.
So if you change the organization of your board and totally get rid of the fundraising element, that levels the playing field, and you might, in other words, how do you feel about having someone that you've actually served as the end user or client, if you will, serve on a board? I mean, I don't know anyone more qualified to actually. So by getting rid of you have to generate, as a board member, you are a $10,000 donor automatically. By eliminating the old way of saying this is purely fundraising, you can open up a ton of different ways to engage someone who might not normally be able to serve on the board.
And by doing a better job, by being more effective in dealing with the purpose, their argument is, and there's a couple of examples, they raise more money. They actually raised more money than they did from their board because of the involvement and the outreach into the community.
They become your storyteller.
Yeah.
Yeah. My question though is, who has a tough conversation with the traditional board member that wants to hold on? Is that something that is led by, say, the hired executive director through agendas on the board to try to, this is what our focus is gonna be, and hopefully a light bulb goes off in this board member's head that thinks, I don't fit in this organization or fit on this board anymore?
You know what, I remember this came up. We've won. I spent with board sources, right? And a number of people who talked about a board member that was dysfunctional, how do we do, so that's for the board, right? In a similar vein to what you're saying, who has a tough conversation. And the first answer was always, what do bylaws say about replacing board members in terms of service? And reappointing board members. Oh, we just did that. So this person's been on the board for 25 years, even though their term limit was 3 years, right? And that's what the bylaws say. Almost all bylaws have. So you naturally let the turnover exist. It would be one, right? You don't want to kick people off. You want to do this naturally. Right? Because you don't want to create ill will with people who have served the organization well. But it's putting together a plan that as we replace board members, bring new blood in, bring new voices in, then we might not replace that person with that person doing another term, or a person just like that taking their spot. We're gonna really try to reach out to the community we serve. So you don't have to have a difficult conversation, but the difficult conversation could be, we're gonna follow bylaws now.
We have that, we have our board, they're 3-year terms, but they could go up to 12 years.
Right.
Right.
But I see it as you put people on the board that believes in this, there's this term could be peer pressure to, you need to follow along because we're moving and you want to stay on with us, you need to adapt.
Yeah, it really is. It's a conversation. It's gonna be, this conflict's gonna exist. Because with change comes conflict. Almost always, right? Almost always, with some type of change, some type of distance, some type of, otherwise we could do it, right? Otherwise we just go ahead and do it. The conversation, I'm having that conversation. I'm going to purpose. I'm going right back to common purpose. Because when people have a mutual purpose together, they can get so much done. And you might find they don't really engage with the purpose. It's a good resume builder, we're checking off, I did service to my company, XYZ, right? That's not really committed to the purpose. Then when all the discussions change, they feel, I don't have anything to be.
I was gonna add, the other thing you can do is start to change your meetings. Especially if you have incredibly tactical board meetings. We're gonna review the budget. Now we're gonna have a program. Now we're gonna hear the executive director drone on for 20 minutes. Now we're gonna, right? I mean, sorry, that's. It's, if we engage a
board chair who believes in this. Lift the agenda. Ron mentioned start with the mission moment. That's a way to start connecting them to purpose. Then have strategic discussions as the better part of your meeting. First of all, they're gonna go, I don't know any of this stuff. And they're gonna, you need to educate, you need to help bring them along. But the people who wanna just sit there and listen to the executive director drone on are gonna start to self-select out.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is just because they can't have 4 3-year terms, doesn't mean you have to invite them back. After 3 years, you have the option not to invite them back in your bylaws, and also have a way to, as Missy Gowie would say, release for that term.
We've shortened our term years because my recruitment and asking people to commit for 3 years is almost is a variance as well. So shortening the term limits may be a saving grace.
Again, reflect back to why are you having difficulty getting people for 3 years? Because a person's probably on 4 boards. Right?
And it's boring to serve.
Yeah. So if you flip the purpose for why they exist, I mean, I think this starts to get at some of those perennial problems with board recruitment. Because now you got people who are connected. If you're connected to an issue, let's go. Let's go. 3 hours, no problem. We're making a difference in the lives of people. We truly are. Let's do it. 3 years? Fine. You know, I mean, if we bring more new voices onto the boards, we're not struggling to get the same people's divided time. So one might help solve that issue. So yes.
How involved would you recommend, or do you think the staff should be in board member selection? We have a pretty large board and a very functional governance that pretty much identifies those people and presents them to the board.
Right.
With not much staff input. So how, and with your staff being the people that work the closest with the people that you're serving, how involved would you recommend that?
Very. Your answer is somewhat in your question, right? So we have a governance committee composed of a board who recycles board people. So they're asking their friends and there's right. So if they're not, and it's always an effect. So if that group is not connected with the community in a substantive way, right? Again, as you go through and start reading this, the connected nature of it is different. It's not just I care, right? It's not just, we care about lots of things. It's they're connected to the issue, right? Your staff, and you said yourself, staff's gonna be they're out there, they're going, hey, there's a community person that we're serving, I think would be a great board member. And then our normal conversation with people having been on board before, where do they work? What do they do? Right? The question should be, what's their voice? What's their voice? What would their voice add to our discussion about the way we construct our programs, where we put our programs, how we do everything. Things we don't even think about because we lack that connection in a really visceral way, like a really deep, they talk about deep listening a lot, right? Really, really getting into the mindset of other people. And that's hard to do at a global level. We need to have that voice. We need to have that conversation. We really listen to folks who've gone through those experiences. Nothing better than having somebody who maybe used the services of the organization, right? Maybe as a child, teen, whatever, right? And come back and be able to contribute back to it. Again, you still need, none of this says we don't pay attention to counting, we still have to do those things. They're just reversing the order of this and putting my primary focus that the board is driven by purpose first, not driven by organizational vitality. Right? Not driven by organizational. So there's in the article that we'll send out, they talk about in San Diego, there was a museum of man. Right there. Right? And they changed it to become the Museum of Us. Right? Why? Because they realize I mean, obvious reasons here, right? But there's some long-standing, right? You can see arguments made for tradition and it's been that way, but they knew that by changing it, they called it decolonization. That was gonna mean have a big impact. So it was driven by purpose. It wasn't driven by, oh, we'll get more people coming to the museum or things like that. Those were secondary. Right? Those were secondary considerations. The first consideration is about the purpose. Right? You see, it's a nice little study from what this museum did, and how thinking as a purpose-driven board, the questions get changed. Right? That's on the handout I gave out too. Is a purpose-driven board asks the question this way. Traditional board asks it this way. This is how we ask questions and information. What other reactions? It doesn't be questions. I'm not passing myself off as an expert on this, just as a provocateur more than an expert at this moment.
I think sometimes boards happen because all of a sudden you have a person who's interested, or you find someone that you've talked to and it's a live body that you can put in place. Because we need a movement.
Right.
And I think the thought process is, again, not going back to the beginning. So when you talk about change, you're having to re-engineer a lot of factors and functions within the team.
Yeah.
And it has to be a team effort to do that.
Very much.
And so in those conversations of if you need to release or not, but again, going back to what is their connection, number one, and a lot of times I agree, it just goes back to the why and purpose. And is that why and purpose currently effective today?
Yeah.
It might have been 10, 15 years ago and through the years, but again, where is it today?
Yeah.
So you might have to have some of those hard conversations as well.
They are. And it's say, so many stories. Well, why do we have a board? I have to have. It's the law. Bad reasons, right? It's a reason, but if that drives your selection, you don't care who it is. Right? And who's on the board? Oh, it's my mom, friends.
It's all up to fail sometimes.
Right.
Unfortunately.
But if all you're doing is checking that box, right? Good to say, right? Instead, all this is about recasting our questions. It's about seeing the board as a partner, right? As a lead, as a voice in the purpose. So it's not, when you're trying to really think about how to, I did a workshop a couple weeks ago, so we go over all the traditional things and we're talking about this, then realize at the end, I think we were talking a while ago, I gotta throw out everything in the beginning. We gotta start the discussion of nonprofits here. Why, and purpose, and let it flow from there. Rather than talking about legal obligations, fiduciary right? Don't start there. Let that be something that happens down here. Like, I got to reverse all these slides. It's only through the conversations about this and starting to read about it and talking to others that you get there. But like in your example, when we created the board, as I needed people, we're just going to change the question of an organization that's deeply committed to its purpose, usually an executive director or a founder. They're going to know people. They're going to know people that are from their service category, right? They're going to know those folks. We have to encourage them, but that's okay. We got to reverse the mentality that, because that person doesn't have 20 years of board service and they got this, and this board, right? They're puffing their chest on their board service stuff, right? I think it's changing that conversation about who should be serving on boards, that then will allow and freedom to open up really good voices to have on that board.
And not only reaching out to staff, that type of thing, but also reaching out to the organizations that you've worked with through the years.
Yes.
And getting some of that feedback.
Right.
And, suggestions and help and partnering with them as well.
Like, who do you know that's passionate or working or volunteering on issue X? Let's go recruit them. right? I don't care what they work with, right? Let's recruit them. Vet them appropriately, right? But, you know. Yeah, so be in the community. I'm not talking geographic, but really be in the community that you're serving. Yeah.
Is there a training opportunity for people who have never been on a board and? Like we have people who come to our organization and do would be a great voice. That they, you know, have come under our executive director and so they feel like their authority is not the that we're governing over that. So for them to find that, to be released into that and to understand it, is there training available for that kind of thing?
Not yet, right? We've had some conversations about doing it, and in those conversations, we need to be more informed about my collaborating today. Seriously, right? Because it's a different skill set. We do a strategic planning, right? So when you get into the nuts and bolts of those strategic conversations, what's the skill set for that? Deep listening, being able to articulate your viewpoint, be respectful, being okay with conflict. That's the training, right? That's the program, the dialogic nature. Because if those conversations are rich and informed by experience, we're good to go, right? Where a lot of board training today is about the nuts and bolts of legal and loyalty and oaths and obligations. So we're gonna have to rethink that training, but nothing really exists yet.
Board source might have something.
Yeah, they do. They're putting out a lot of material on this. Again, we'll send out some links. I'll give it to Alexis and send them out. They got a whole page on this on their website, yourboardsource.com. There's a lot of South things. I don't know if I've seen it, but I'll look and see if there is. Nothing in our community, but we should create something about that.
Because our board training is basically training them on our organization.
Right.
So we need to flip that on its head. They already know about our organization. We just need to train them to be a efficient, conscious board member.
So what's the why? I don't know. What's the why of your organization?
Alternatives for the older adults.
Right. So
And keeping people, older adults safe in their own home.
right. So you would first start with education and a commitment to that population. Right? Do they have a passion for understanding issues of aging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Have they been affected by it somehow? Right? That becomes the first, and again, it's not much training on that. They should come in with that, right? Be somewhat involved with that issue already. And then understand how your programs connect to that. But you want that purpose first, I would think, or somehow. And you can maybe grow some of this. That's where they're not, I don't really see much on growing people into that passion. It's more of having it beforehand. That's something I gotta think about, right? Is can we develop and train somebody in the why? Or do we want that to pre-exist prior to being on the board? Then we're worried about board mechanics. But I think training on a conversation, period, is how to have good conversations where people go at it in a respectful, not a welcome back Connor, well, you young people, right? And all that, or what was Jane Curtin, what's the name on Saturday Night Live? There's not the bitterness, right? Not the conversation we see role modeled in politics and television, right? Throw all that away, but real deep conversations about people who care about it. Where it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to offer perspective, but then listen to the counter argument. That's the training that's necessary for this to work. Because your meetings are gonna be full of that.
It goes back to, again, leadership. If you think about the difference between a manager and a leader, and what it takes to be a good leader, sometimes people have it, sometimes they don't, or don't want it. But you do need people that will be there for you in present. That
Yep.
are on the leadership side of things versus wanting to dictate them.
That's a bad manager. Managers need to do it too. Don't let them off the hook. That's in my years of teaching leadership. I don't let that person off the hook. Right? You can be a-hole and attempt to lead. You can be an a-hole and attempt to manage. Or you can be a wonderful person to manage and a wonderful person who attempts to lead.
Everybody needs to be able to.
I don't let people who are hurt want to dictate. I don't let them off ever. I was, well, you can't be, you're not even an effective manager when you do that. I don't like to let people off. I want good human skills for all of what we do in an organization. That's I'm just a little bit of my own. So yeah. Don't create the bifurcation. We can talk after. Don't create a bifurcation. I don't like the bifurcation now. Managers need to engage their employees too.
But
Full stop.
people have a difficult time getting outside of that mindset.
I know we gotta work on that. Yeah, I have whole workshops on that.
That's what needs to change.
Yeah, send people to our workshops. That is my passion, after teaching leadership for 25 years. That my passion really is about changing our conversations in our workplaces that are uplifting everybody and not letting folks say, oh, I'm managing people, so get the job done. It doesn't work. It never works.
You gotta bring them along with you.
Yeah, no matter what you're doing, kids, whatever, right? We're all the same. Be nurturing. I correct my typo, by the way, Alexa. Yes,
So. Word composition like this is based on term limits and things like that can take time
sure.
to really see an effective change on it.
Yeah.
How do you recommend if you get new and, different voices and they're ready to make changes, but the change is kind of going too slow?
Yeah.
Maybe they become disengaged. Or like you said, they catch on to bad habits where you start kind of doing it as the board has always done, and that's not really what we're trying to do. And so now here we got a new person with a fresh mindset and it's gonna change things, and now they're just gonna fall into.
Right.
How we're always done.
Yeah, I mean, you take advantage of, look at the agenda, like I said. So we're more strategic in our conversations. But rather than the mission moment, the program officer talking about how you made a change. Bring people in who've been affected by the change. Right? Don't have the staff say, well, here's how we did, and this affected this many people, see how we're serving our mission. Bring the voice in. I think that's one of the first steps you can do, right? To give the board members that direct connection with somebody who is in the service area. I think that's an easy first thing to do. But again, reversing and doing whatever you can with the existing board to make them knowledgeable and passionate about the why and the purpose of the organization. And if they're uncomfortable with that, they might self-select out. But I think you would need to go fairly hard on that for maybe a year of meetings, depending on how often you meet, to really raise their level of understanding about the issue and how programs work. What else is being done? You're not the only nonprofit. Now, who else is doing other things? See, that's part of the ecosystem, right? It's getting beyond what the one nonprofit does and asking ourselves, what is the community doing? Are there private entities doing something? Municipalities, right? The whole ecosystem, because that's what you exist within. So that's the understanding. That's the conversations that would arise. So I think that would be my thought of a way to do that.
I hate to cut you off, but you have a prior engagement.
You do.
Yeah.
Selfishly, we have an AFP focus group at 1, so that he's hosting.
So everybody can stay.
We're gonna wrap it up. If you guys have any follow-up questions for Ron, I'm sure you can reach out, Watson and
Yep,
Associates.
Please do.
Otherwise, let's get a run around of fun.
Yeah. And we'll send out some, if you're really interested, remind me, we'll send out some materials. It's all accessible. I don't think any of this is behind a password wall or anything, so.